So it was a full and exciting week at the UUA's General Assembly in Pittsburgh. I was surprised to realize that it was actually my first in-person GA in 9 years. Back then, our daughter was barely a toddler, and now she's going into 6th grade. Time does fly. At this General Assembly, as usual, there were great worship services and workshops, fabulous music and lectures. We celebrated Susan Frederick Gray's 6 incredibly challenging years as UUA president, and we installed Sophia Betancourt as our new president, first woman of color to be UUA president. But this GA was largely about the proposed new language for Article 2 of the UUA's bylaws, which includes the covenant between and among UU congregations. So the UUFP is part of that covenant too. The proposed new language is built around 7 values. It includes much of the language of the current 7 principles, but is more explicitly centered on love. Pam, would you put the Flower of Values image on the screen, please? A while back, someone noticed that this looks a lot like the rainbow pinwheels that Dollar Tree sells, and there were a lot of those pinwheels at GA. And you may have noticed that we have our own pinwheel, and I've been adding the initials of the values as we've been considering them on First Sundays this year. We started with love in the center back in February. Then we considered generosity, justice, transformation, and when we celebrated the centenary of the flower ceremony last month, pluralism. And today, we turn to interdependence. Now at GA, thank you, Pam, you can take that down. The proposed language for interdependence was amended by a clear majority vote of more than 2,000 delegates. It now reads, "We honor the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. With humility and reverence, we covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation, creating and nurturing sustainable relationships of repair, mutuality, and justice." Part of this amendment was to strengthen our commitment from cherishing the earth to protecting it. So today, with Independence Day coming up this week, let's celebrate our interdependence with Mother Earth and the web of life that holds and supports all of us as well. I found my way to Unitarian Universalism first because I wanted a religion that took environmentalism to heart. And second, because I wanted a religion that was compatible with the scientific view of existence. After rejecting what I thought was religion for so many years, I found that I was looking for a place that could hold my need for spirituality in nature as understood by science, and I found that place in Unitarian Universalism. I grew up with math and science being my favorite subjects in school, and then I focused on physics in college. I applied what I had learned after that working as a research scientist, trying to figure out new ways of understanding how our universe works. At the same time, I was learning about the environmental problems we face, particularly climate change. I remember reading something in the magazine of the Sierra Club that what was really needed to tackle these environmental problems was a new religious perspective. We needed to understand ourselves not as having dominion over the natural world, not even as having stewardship over it, but as coming from nature and being part of it. The human family as a branch of the tree of life, inseparable. I found that religious perspective in Unitarian Universalism, with our theology of interdependence and a commitment to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That's the language we've been using to talk about it for the last 40 years. The 7th principle of our current covenant with other UU congregations that forms the Unitarian Universalist Association. There almost wasn't a seventh principle. When the UUA was formed in 1961, there were only 6 principles. After the UU Women's Federation and others pointed out how terribly sexist that 1961 language was, there was a multi-year revision process in the 1980s, but there were still 6 principles. It was almost at the end of the process, at the 1984 UUA General Assembly in Columbus, Ohio, when everything was done and it was just a matter of voting on it, that the Reverend Paul LaRue made his way to the microphone and proposed a 7th principle: respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Some of my colleagues have noted that most people find their way into Unitarian Universalism through one of 2 doors, either the 7th principle or the 1st, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. These are certainly the 2 principles that most UUs are able to remember at any rate. And maybe the 4th, but the others, not so much. For myself, I definitely became a UU through the 7th principle doorway, and our theology of interdependence has always been central to my experience and perspective as a UU. Now, you might ask if interdependence only became important to UUs in 1984, and my answer to that question is no. It may have been explicitly named for the first time in 1984, but it's been part of our liberal tradition for much longer. There was the Humanist Manifesto of 1933, for example, which specifically recognized humanity as a part of nature, having emerged as a result of the process of evolution. About half of the signatories of the Humanist Manifesto were Unitarians. One signatory was a Universalist, the Reverend Clinton Lee Scott, in whose memory the maple tree outside the front door was planted. Perhaps the best expression of interdependence, though, comes from Maria Mitchell, the 19th century Unitarian and astronomer who was the first woman elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Mitchell said that small as is our whole system compared with the infinitude of creation, brief as is our life compared with the cycles of time, we are so tethered to all by the beautiful dependencies of law that not only the sparrow's fall is felt to the uttermost bound, but the vibrations set in motion by the words that we utter reach through all space, and the tremor is felt through all time. For many UUs, our naming of interdependence recognizes that we are inextricably, wonderfully connected to one another and to all of the web of life. We are born of this interdependence, and it makes possible our living in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in the food we eat, and in the light of the sun that sustains life on earth. But it's more than just appreciating our connectedness. Our theology of interdependence calls us to act, to take up both environmentalism and environmental justice, to protect the web of life itself, to use natural resources sustainably, and in so doing to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and equitably. Given my own attachment, I was very glad to see that interdependence was named as an explicit theological value of our faith in the proposed new UU Covenant for the 21st century. And I'm glad that at last month's UUA General Assembly in Pittsburgh, the delegates voted to amend the proposed language from the potentially passive cherish the earth to the definitely active protect the earth. This is so important right now as the effects of climate change become more and more apparent. with the worst effects, as always, impacting poor and marginalized people around the world. Interdependence calls us to environmentalism and environmental justice, not merely appreciating the earth and the amazing ways in which we are all connected, but healing the damage we have done and the hurt we have caused, and ensuring that the future of life on earth is sustainable for everyone. I'm going to ask you some wondering questions now, and I'll give you a little time after each to reflect. Pam will put each question on the screen too. I wonder how you bring awareness and gratitude to our time with one another. I wonder what agreements you have with other life forms, even with the earth itself. I wonder which theological doorway you passed through to become a UU. I wonder how you understand interdependence as a UU value. I invite you into a guided meditation with me now. You may want to settle into a comfortable position. You may want to sit up, place your feet flat on the floor, and allow your hands to rest loosely in your lap. You may want to close your eyes to allow your imagination to well up within you. In your mind's eye, imagine a great net, spun with delicate intricacy, adorned with lovely jewels, and stretching out in all directions. This is the magnificent net of the great god Indra. Let us look upon it and wonder. Indra's net is like a spider's web in its intricacy and loveliness. But this is no ordinary weaving, for it spans the infinity of time and space. At each place where the threads of the net connect to one another, a single glittering jewel has been hung. And since the net is infinite in dimension, there are an infinite number of jewels too. They stretch out across the vastness of existence, suspended in and supported by the net, catching the light and twinkling like stars. It is a beautiful sight to behold. Imagine selecting one of the jewels for a closer look. Perhaps it catches your eye with its color, its luster. As you inspect this particular jewel, you noticed first its cut and polished surfaces, the source of its glittering. But then you see Within this jewel, there are reflections of the other jewels on the net, and not just a few, but all of the other jewels in their infinite array. Each jewel in Indra's net is reflected in every other jewel, an infinite process of reflection. Now understand that each sparkling jewel is a being, a human, a plant, an animal, from the most majestic redwood to the lowliest worm. Each being is connected to every other by the net. Each is reflected in every other. We are all here, shining on and influencing one another. A change in one jewel, in one being, in one person, will result in a change, however slight, in every other. Everything affects everything else in this interdependent web of all existence. Pull back now and see more of Indra's net again. See how ripples of glittering light pass across it. Think about what ripples you might be sending out across the web of all existence. After all, when we harm even a single part of the net, we harm the entire web. In the same way, though, every helpful action will send positive ripples throughout the infinite net, lighting up every jewel, every being, every life. Allow yourself to come back to this time, to this place, and open your eyes when you're ready. We honor the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. With humility and reverence, we covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation, creating and nurturing sustainable relationships of repair, mutuality, and justice. This language for the proposed new covenant between UU congregations is obviously compatible with our own UUFP covenant, which includes promises to protect our earth and to build racial, social, and environmental justice in the beloved community. That's not surprising, of course, given that we've been living as UUs with interdependence as an explicitly named theological value for about 40 years. Here at the UUFP, our new Earth Justice team is one place where we're living into our covenant, where we're living into our interdependence, and we're doing this by engaging with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light and with Green Sanctuary 2030. Green Sanctuary is the UUA program to support congregations in not simply going green, but in transforming themselves in the face of climate change. As the program is described, climate justice calls us to mitigate or reduce the emissions that cause climate change, adapt to changing climate conditions, and increase resilience to worsening climate impacts through congregational transformation and community engagement. We must balance the urgency of the climate crisis with the need to center justice in our actions. Opening our minds and hearts to learn and collaborate with communities most impacted will ensure a just transition to a clean energy future where all can thrive. And our relationship as a partner faith community with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light will support us in this too, through the workshops and other resources they offer on environmental justice and climate justice. This is one way we can protect the earth and all beings from exploitation. This is how we can create and nurture sustainable relationships of repair, mutuality, and justice. When we recognize the fact of interdependence, when we face the undeniable existential reality of our connectedness, when we understand that every sparkling jewel that adorns Indra's net is a being, whether plant or animal or person, then we have a responsibility to live into our interdependence by striving not just for calm, but for peace, not just for equality, but for equity, not just for freedom, but for liberation, not just for fairness, but for justice. And remember, one of those sparkling jewels in Indra's net is you. May it be so.